Bill Carroll, Zenny62 Media, and I hope you enjoyed the draft. I certainly did. I'm going to walk you through what I think the drafted tight ends sort of will likely have early in their careers in terms of a career arc. I'm going to start, of course, at the very top with Colston Loveland. And he may initially be a tight end too, which you may think if you're picking at 10, how could that be the case? But I think Cole Kmet might actually be helped by this in a strange sort of way. First of all, more 12 personnel. Ben Johnson ran that just barely over 33%, a little over 1 in every 3 plays. Had 2 tight ends on the field. That number may actually go up with the Bears. And Loveland is a full-service tight end. It's sort of in the Jason Witten mold, and I think that he's going to have a very productive career, but I don't think he's going to lead the rookie tight ends in yardage. He may be near the top in receptions. He may be even near the top in touchdowns, but I think he'll be somewhere around 3rd in actual receiving yardage, partially because he doesn't tend to do a lot after the catch. Now, the reverse is true of the tight end goes second off the board, who a lot of people had slated as a top 10 pick, which I don't think the NFL ever quite saw Tyler Warren as a top 10 selection, but he goes about the right spot. He was a healthy scratch from physical testing, which is slightly concerning to me because normally if someone's a freak athlete, no matter where they think they might be drafted, they still go ahead and physically test just to, sort of remove all doubt and maybe push their stock up. But he didn't do any testing. But he's clearly athletic, just probably not a freak because, like I said, I think if he's a freak, he would have gone and done testing. But he goes to a perfect situation. The Colts desperately need a tight end. He's probably going to lead in yardage. He's probably going to be near the top in touchdowns. But the next person I'm going to get to, I think, is going to be the one that actually leads the tight end group in touchdowns. That's Mason Taylor, of course, son of Jason Taylor, goes at 42 to the Jets. It's an ideal spot. Once again, the Jets are also desperate to find an infusion of talent at tight end. I believe the Jets are going to feed the tight end position. I believe he's going to lead this group in touchdowns, receptions at least. And he'll probably be in the top 3 in both yardage and receptions. Terrence Ferguson's a little more interesting to me. He goes at 46 to the Rams, who also really could use a tight end. The Rams don't exactly feature the tight end, so he's probably going to be about where he was drafted. He's the 4th tight end off the board. He'd probably be 4th in yardage, touchdowns, and receptions, but I still think he ends up with about 4 touchdowns. I'm guessing about 328 yards in receiving and probably about 27 receptions. And then that brings us to the most mercurial is Elijah Arroyo. If you know, Mr. Arroyo went number 50 overall to Seattle. Bedeviled by injuries, right? Had almost 2 entire seasons taken away from him due to injury in his time at Miami of Florida. Terrific route runner, great hands, so-so blocker. But that injury history is concerning. If he can stay healthy, I think he might actually outperform Ferguson in touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. I could see him being close to 500 yards in receiving, once again, with the caveat that he manages to play at least 15 games, which is not at all guaranteed. And then the second most intriguing to me is Harold Fannin. Harold Fannin was at one point my tight end too. Now, 2 things happened. One, he struggled at the Senior Bowl to get separation, which when you're a smaller tight end, that matters more, right? If he were 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", I wouldn't care so much. But he's 6'2" and change, or 6'3" and 3/8 actually to be exact, and 231 pounds. So if you can't get separation, you're not a great blocker, and you're undersized tight end, you've got to test very well, which he did. 4.71 is, for his size, is actually below average for tight ends. To put it in perspective, he's about the same, well, he's lighter, but about the same height. In fact, 6'2" and 5/8 was the height for George Kittle. But Kittle was heavier by 12 pounds at the combine, and he's heavier than that now, obviously, and was a devastating blocker. You don't get the devastating blocker, and not quite the same run after catch, though Fannin's really good after catch. He doesn't break as many tackles, but he's very creative as a runner. He could turn out to have a really nice career. He goes at pick number 67 to the Browns, who clearly have their number one tight end. So he's your move tight end. I still think he ends up in the top 5 in receiving yardage, probably just outside the top 5 in receptions, and probably a little further down in touchdowns. He may only have 2 touchdown receptions. Maybe he'll get a rushing touchdown in some sort of trick play. But he's a fascinating projection just because of his lack of size and the fact that he tested not super well for a smaller tight end. Gunnar Helm, speaking of not testing well, now he gutted his way through that severely sprained ankle, but even before that, he wasn't testing super well. Now, the fact is that he's going to play better than he tests, but I think he's going to be probably around 6th in receptions, probably about 8th in receiving yards, and he might end up, just because the Tennessee Titans don't have someone similar in the red zone, he might end up in the top 5 in touchdowns amongst rookie tight ends. Now that brings us to Mitchell Evans. Another person, not quite to the Arroyo level, but another person who's had some injury concerns. Evans is another one. He's similar to Loveland in that he gives you a little bit of everything. Not as good across the board, but he gives you a little bit of everything. Really solid blocker, solid route runner, very good hands. Probably the best thing about him is his hands, amongst the best hands in the tight end group. But just sort of average after the catch, average testing, average everything except blocking and hands. So I think he's going to end up probably about 8th or 9th in receiving yardage. He'll probably get 1 touchdown. I think he'll not be a full-time starter yet. But I do like his chances to eventually become a full-time starter. The Carolina Panthers clearly are looking for something there at tight end. He could eventually become that guy. Now, I come to the player that right now will not be the number 1 tight end, but I won't be shocked if he ends up in the top 3 career amongst this group. And once again, a feel-old moment for me because I'm now scouting 2 generations of Oronde Gadsons. This is Oronde Gadsden II. I scouted his father seemingly a million years ago, but Oronde Gadsden II was originally a wide receiver, a guy that grew into being a tight end. Not much bigger than Fannin, taller, but not much heavier than Fannin, about 5 or 6 pounds heavier than Fannin, but the big deal is much more athletic. He's one of the more athletic tight ends in the whole draft class, but he'll need to grow as a blocker. I think he'll be initially outside the top 5 in all, receiving touchdowns, yardage. I do think if you're like a dynasty fantasy person, if you get a chance to pick him up in the later rounds, do so, because in a couple of years, he'll be in the top 4, I think, across the board. Then we come to one of my favorites. He's never going to be one of the top guys in anything that's measured for tight ends. But Jackson Hawes, Harvard by way of Georgia Tech, or Georgia Tech by way of Harvard, is a blocker. He will have an NFL career for 68 years because he's one of the best blocking tight ends in this draft class. And he likes to block. He's physically powerful. He approaches blocking like it's his job, right? He catches passes also fairly well, but that's like a bonus when you get a guy like Jackson Hawes. He goes to the Buffalo Bills. He'll probably be a tight end 3 for most of his career there. May eventually work up into a tight end 2. He's not a guy you're going to pick up in your fantasy draft, whether it be dynasty or redraft. And then that brings us to Robbie Utes, Alabama, another guy who's sort of in a similar mold to Hawes, but more athletic. He's actually surprisingly tested fairly well as an athlete, but he's just not that refined as a receiver. And I don't think he'll ever be a great receiver. I think he's another tight end 3. Here's someone I think has a chance to be a tight end 2, though. The next one, in the 6th round, at selection 202 to the Vikings, goes Gavin Bartholomew. I think Gavin Bartholomew will be one of the great surprises of the tight end group. I think he'll be a pleasant surprise in this tight end group, and I think at some point he even has an outside chance to be a starter, but more likely is at least a tight end 2. The rest of the group, I'll wrap up fairly quickly. Thomas Fadone is a guy I think starts as a 3, becomes a 2 as well. Better athlete than expected, can do a little bit of everything. And then the last 2, Caleb Lower, who's from Utah State, fun player, once again, fights to make the roster, maybe as a tight end 3. And then Moliki Mawao from UCLA, decent athlete, decent hands, may or may not even make the team in New Orleans, but I think he might make the team, make the 53-man roster. He'll make the team, but 53-man roster as, once again, a move tight end. And then last but not least, right, the final one selected, though people had him higher originally, was Luke Lachey, son, of course, of the great offensive lineman. I think he hangs around the NFL for 5 or 6 years. I don't think he ever becomes a starter. So that is my analysis of the tight end group, and I'll have another position group next.